Hi everyone, it's been a while, but welcome back to the Blue Rift tutorial series. This is part 7 of 12. Today we're going to be looking at actors. What are actors? Well, actors are any object that sort of has programming to it, anything that you can interact with, basically. Actors can cover a variety of different things, but I'll be leaving the more complicated actors for their own tutorial. For this tutorial, I'm going to go over very simple ones. For example, let's start with something simple. Let's say that we want to place some enemies into our level so that our player has stuff to fight. Now, this geometry isn't exactly the best for placing down enemies, but it could work. I could leave that as is, but for the sake of tutorial, let's make a more ideal geometry for enemies to walk around on. So here's a more basic geometry that we could put some enemies on. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Alright, that should be good. Now, I'm gonna have some geometry over here for the part that I'm gonna demonstrate after this. First off, let's place some enemies. Let's bring over our handy friend, the content browser. And with our content browser, we're gonna go to a new tab. We're gonna go to the tab that says Actor Classes. At the top of here, you'll see other things, but these aren't that important for basic level making. You will pretty much only ever use Content Browser and Actor Classes, with the exception of some other specifics. To just quickly go over them, levels lets you control what levels are being streamed in, which I will go over in a different tutorial not in this series, because level streaming isn't exactly something you're going to need for a Blue Rift. The Scene tab lets you look at every actor that's in the level. Now keep in mind that meshes and just sort of pretty much anything that exists in the level is technically an actor, but the ones that we're going to be placing are going to be more active and specific actors. I don't actually know what layers does, I've never actually used it, but feel free to play around with it if you're curious. What I'm assuming this does is that you'll be able to create layers and then hide them as you want, which shouldn't be that important for this. This documentation tab will open up the UDK documentation. This doesn't actually work anymore, sadly. It's kind of a pain because, you know, Epic Games took down all the documentation because everybody's using UE4 now. But, you know, whatever. Anyways, that was completely unrelated. Now what you'll see here is just a giant, like, onslaught of stuff. But it can actually be pretty easy to find what you want. Everything's pretty intuitively named, but there are some weird naming conventions due to the fact that a lot of stuff was named in the beta of the game. And in the beta of the game was a very different game. So just keep in mind that what things are called in the game itself might not be what they're called in file. For example, let's say we want to place some Mafia. You search up Mafia, right? That's actually incorrect. That will give you some results, but it won't be what we're looking for. We want to get the Mafia enemies. Now, unfortunately, there's no real good way to find out what things are called, other than going into levels to figure out what they called them. But for reference sake, let me just tell you what this one's called. For the Mafia enemies, they're actually called Mobster. There are a bunch of variations on it. There are NPCs, and each different variant of that NPC, and down here are the enemies. One thing that Hat in Time does have consistent is its file naming. Everything, if something is an enemy, it will be hat_enemy_ whatever. So so that's one way that you can find something pretty easily. If you don't know what something's called, you can always search hat_enemy, and then this will give you every enemy in the game. So now that I have all these enemies here, I can scroll through it, notice Mobster, and then I might think, oh, is that it? and then put it into the level. In order to put something into the level, all you gotta do is select it in the actor classes, and then right click, go down, and then scroll down to add whatever the actor you have selected here. For some enemies, like the Mafia, you can actually go over to all templates and then go down to add mobster, but this mobster is pretty much the only enemy in the game that is like this, so it's kind of limited, and I don't really use it that often. I actually forget that it's a thing that you can do, but say that's one way you can do it. And then it'll give you some variables that you can mess with. We're not going to use that. We're going to use just this one. And then click add hat underscore enemy underscore mobster here. And that will put it wherever you right clicked. Now you'll see this error saying not in pylon, and I will go over how to fix this error. Unlike the timepiece error, this error actually does matter. So first off, let's place a few of these for our player to fight. You move them around just like you would move any other object. They can also be duplicated, but please keep in mind, duplicating a bunch of enemies will cause a bunch of lag, not for the level, but just for your editor, and it may freeze up. If you do it too much, you might crash the editor, so my recommendation is just to place them using the actor classes tab, if you can. If you want to copy and paste a bunch of them, I recommend instead of alt dragging them, like you could to duplicate actors before, I recommend just going Control C, in which it will still freeze for a bit, but, you know, it's a lot safer. And then push Control V, which will then place one on top of the existing one, which you can then drag. I find this avoids crashes much more frequently. I say 2 Mafia Men are enough. Let's play our level. As you can see, they're now in the level. Okay, so this is actually bad for the example I was trying to make. I don't know how these things are navigating, but let me use birds to demonstrate the not in pylon issue. So let's go hat underscore enemy crow. Bird. Hat underscore enemy mad crow. That's what they called it. See, you kind of just have to try a bunch of things until you find what you're looking for. So anyways, this will be a better example of what I'm trying to demonstrate. So let's put a few of these in the level. I find these birds are a little bit safer to copy and paste all willy-nilly, but I still wouldn't recommend copy and pasting like a ton of them. Anyways, let's start our level. As you see, the birds are now on the level, but they're not attacking us. They'll notice us, but they won't actually chase us. This is because, as the error implies, these enemies are not in what is referred to as a pylon. What a pylon is basically an actor that selects a part of a level and then places AI pathing down so that the enemies can walk around at will. Pretty much every enemy needs to be in a pylon for them to function correctly. But as you saw with the mobster, there are some exceptions, but it's recommended that you put all of your enemies inside of a pylon regardless. The way that you do this is by right-clicking, going to add actor, and then choosing add pylon. You can also do this from the actor classes menu, but I just recommend doing it from here because it's faster. It will then put this P into the level. When you select the P, it'll show this giant box. That shows everything that's in the pylon. Now this is a bit big for what we need. Pylons are weird in that you want them to cover as much as possible while at the same time using as little of them as possible. Because you want to try and I don't know if this actually affects optimization, but I've been told that you want to try and keep everything in as little pylons as possible, because putting a pylon on every single thing might be a little bit, 1, obnoxious, and 2, might cause some issue with loading your file size. So this on its own isn't actually going to work. First off, let's resize this down to a more reasonable size for what we're trying to put a pathing onto. You can resize it similar to how you would resize any other object. So this is more reasonable. So, unlike most objects, you cannot non-uniform scale these, so it will have to always be a cube, which can be a little bit problematic on certain geometry. I'm now noticing that this is off-center. I'm gonna fix this. Being off-center doesn't matter, it's gonna bother me. So, our level, these birds still won't walk around with our current state. We actually need to build the path. The way that you do that is similar to how you build lighting. If you go up to build and then choose build AI path, then it'll go. Unlike lighting, this is very fast. Unless you have tons of pylons, this will be over in probably around a second. Now see how the error has gone away? This is good. Now, there's an important tidbit about when you build AI paths. This is not that important for a square object, but when you get into more complicated geometry, this becomes a necessity to check this. So we've built the AI paths, but we actually can't see them. And the way that we do that pretty easily is by going to our handy drop-down menu up here, going to show, and then going down to show path, or by just pressing P. I just recommend pressing the P key because it's way faster than trying to do that. And as you can see, now we can see our path. Since this object is a square, it's not exactly the most complicated pathing, but when you get into more detailed levels, pathing can start dramatically becoming more complicated. And the reason why you want to check this is because if you're doing more complicated geometry, you want to check it to make sure that it is displaying correctly. Because on more complicated geometry, it can cause some weird bugs, and it'll make it so the pathing is a bit weird, and enemies will get stuck in certain areas of your path. So you want to always check this to make sure it's not that. There's not really a lot you can do to manually change this pathing, other than just like changing your geometry. Now that this is built, this will work just fine. See, our birds now notice us, and they follow us around. I generally use birds because they're a simple enemy that don't cause too much of an issue, but they're at least something for the player to interact with. Now, if we go over here, oh no, we can't actually make that. It's kind of a pain, right? Now, you could SDJ to this, but that you know. Don't make your players SDJ. That's kind of cringe. Anyways, we need to make something to get over here. Now there's a variety of things that we can put to make this jump doable. What you could do is just place another block, but that's kind of boring. So instead, what I'm gonna do is open up our handy browser again, and then let's try a hook shot. So you want to search up hook point. That's the name of the actor for the hook shot, and then you'll see various variants of the different hook shot points. So, for example, Thor. This is the one I use a lot. I think the Thor part refers to a character from Beta. So let's just put this down like we did with our enemy. I like using this one because it's like robotic and has a little propeller, so you can kind of just place it anywhere in the level and it'll look fine. Whereas a lot of these other ones kind of are situational and won't look good. Now, as you can see, this green little outline shows the area in which the player can attach to the hook point. But what you might notice is that it kind of disappears here, and that's because fog will hide the area of some of these actors. If you're having trouble finding it, push the F key to disable the fog while you move it. This will make it a lot easier to position stuff into place. Make sure you're always circling around something that you put down, otherwise it might not be centered and it'll look kind of weird. So the hook points are pretty nice. That's all you have to do to get them to work. You just place them down and then boom, it just works. Hook points are pretty good if you need to move the player to a distant location, but you want to do so pretty quickly and without the player having to do a lot of complicated movement. A lot of modders have always told me that hook shots are great for the illusion of gameplay. What that means is that while they're not actually doing anything too complicated, they're just sort of going and then jumping, the player will still feel like they're doing something rather than going in a straight line. And that feeling of doing something makes things more interesting rather than just having the same thing over and over again. Variety is very important in your levels, because if you don't have a good variety in your level, it's going to get very boring to play very quickly. So now from here, we can then jump over here and sort of jump onto this platform. Then get up these wall jumps. Now let's put something here. This area has a whole lot of nothing going on in it. You just kind of walk across it. It's not very interesting. So let's put something interesting in it. Important thing to mention about hook points, they don't all have to look like the ones in the base game. You can basically make a hook point anything you want. What you can do is go into the settings of this, go into the properties of this, and then find the mesh and replace it that way. But that can be a little bit complicated for stuff you want, and if it's part of the level geometry, that's not going to work. What you can easily do is just use hat hook point, which will then put this down. And this will be a hook point that just sort of exists, but doesn't have any actual, like, model to it. You'll still be able to see this sprite, mind you, and in order to make it not do that, you're going to want to make it go into display and then click hidden. Now our hook point's invisible, but we can still interact with it. Obviously, you'd want to put this on something that makes sense, but this gives you a lot of freedom in what you can do with it. Anyways, moving on to this spot. Let's make this more interesting. There's lots of things that we can put here, but for this tutorial, I'm going to use fire bars as an example. So, for most like level hazards, things that hurt you but aren't enemies, those are called hat_hazard. Pretty much everything is under here. Some of these won't work on their own. Some of these only work in if they're spawned by other enemies. So we scroll through this to try and find it, and then we find. So we scroll through this to try and find the fire bar. So as I was scrolling through that, I realized that the Gears for Breakfast, the Shams, didn't actually put hazard into the flamethrower thing. This just kind of happens sometimes. It's not their fault. Not every time. Like, you're gonna make mistakes and not label things all the time. But anyways, if you can't find something under the category that it is, then just try and search for things that make sense what it would be called. So for example, for the fire bar, I call it a fire bar because it's similar to a Mario hazard, that being the fire bar, but it's called the flamethrower here. So you may notice that there's a flamethrower and a flamethrower movable. The name is pretty self-explanatory. If something has movable in the title, that means that it can be moved via matinee. This is not always the case, however. It's a little weird sometimes. Sometimes there are actors that can be moved with matinee regardless, even if they don't have a movable thing. But, you know, just experiment with it. Let's use the movable one, not because we're going to move it around, just because it's nice and neat. So now we have our fire bar, and we'll see the little decal that it puts down. As you can see, there's also a little white box here that demonstrates where it's going to come out. So let's rotate it this direction and then move it over here onto this corner. That might be kind of fun. So by default, these things just work. But the important thing is that with a lot of these objects that turn on and off at certain intervals, they have these things called the interval and the timing offset. These things will let you offset how things go. So say you want to make like for example, if we use the lava cake, for example, you know how those platforms rise out of the lava at a sort of like sequence? They do that using timing offset. The timing offset is sort of relative to the interval, and the interval, so basically this will go off every 3 seconds, and then you could offset that by, say, maybe half a second by going 0.5, but since we only have one right now, it's not really that important. So 3 seconds. Let's play from here and then see how that looks. We can see it's working. Owie. But yeah, that works. Let's put another one over here. These things are actually fine to copy paste. Disclaimer, when I say something's fine to copy paste, that doesn't mean you should copy paste it willy-nilly. Just be mindful. The editor is very janky. So let's put another one here. Let's offset this by like 0.2 and then see how that looks. So I actually got it backwards, and it turns out that the timing offset is backwards. So what that means is that 0.2 timing offset will make it go 0.2 seconds faster. Now, of course, this isn't entirely too interesting. It's just kind of some flamethrowers on the platform that you have to sort of wait out and then look for a good time to go in. I'm sure you guys can come up with some pretty interesting level gimmicks. One thing I should note about stuff with timing offsets is that never make your timing offsets precise. And what I mean by that is, if you need something to be exactly 0.2 seconds after something else happens, don't use timing offset, because timing offset is somewhat inconsistent and is sort of affected by the game's optimization, sort of how far away you are from it and all that jazz. So it will work, but the timing will be slightly off. So don't like rely on timing offset if you need specific timing. In general, Hat in Time's pretty bad at tracking time, as ironic as that sounds. But what I mean by that is that it's pretty bad at keeping like exact time for specific objects. Like, you try to make anything rhythm related in Hat in Time, good luck. So these platforms are kind of boring. Let's make them a little bit more interesting. What can we do to make them more interesting? Well, one thing that we could do is make a cookie actor. And what cookies are, well, I mean literal cookies. I don't mean, you know. So you may see cookie, it's not showing up because, you know, why would it be called cookie? You kind of just gotta try stuff. So the cookie we're looking for is a falling platform. So let's try falling. That's not it. Crumble? Okay, so I have no idea what the cookie is called, and I'm too lazy to try and spend forever to search for it. I don't know what the falling cookie is called. Maybe it isn't even an actor. Maybe it's just a modified thing. So we're going to use these platforms instead. These are called hat_platform_train, and these are the train rush platforms that fall. This is a little bit more interesting because then we can just sort of put these into place, rotate it so it like looks nice, delete this. Actually, let's keep that there for guide purposes, like so that we have a guide of where we want our platforms to be. And then boom, we got some platforms. We can adjust the properties of these platforms as well, adjusting how long it takes them to get to full velocity, which basically means how long it takes them to fall completely, how much we want them to shake, how long it takes them to respawn, what the speed of them is. all this stuff that can just be, you know, sort of variations for what you need. So for this purpose, let's select them all and make the restart time 5. That means it'll take 5 seconds for these to respawn. Let's try it out. See, now it just works. It's just a sort of a nice little platform that falls. You can do kind of whatever you want in your levels using these actors. My best recommendation for what you can do to make your level interesting is just kind of go through various actors and then just kind of place them in your level, see how they interact with things, and then just sort of experiment, just like play around with them. Find something that you think is cool. Like, here's something that I think would be cool. Let's put, like, a hammer here. You want to telegraph your hazards. Throwing random stuff at the player isn't very fun for them and can probably frustrate them. So what we can see with this platform is that all the way from here we can already see the hammer. We can already see there's going to be a hammer there. But say we didn't. You still have enough time to react to that. You'll see it coming up, and then you can sort of delay your wall jump to sort of time it. I'm now noticing that's clipping into the ground, so we're going to move that a bit so that it just looks nicer. Stuff clipping is kind of what you want to avoid because when stuff is clipping, it feels kind of janky. And your first levels are going to feel jank regardless. Like, don't worry about making something feel super professional starting out because you are not going to make them feel professional. See, now there's a decal there. That decal gives some extra idea of where it's going to land. You can be on, like, on the corner and not get hit by it. So now, just a reminder, let's give our full level a playthrough to see how we like it. Alright, that's pretty good so far. Like, obviously, the rift is pretty basic, but I'm trying to keep it basic for the sake of the tutorial. What I also recommend is keeping your timer on when you're playtesting, because then you can get a general idea of how long a section is. Now, of course, keep in mind that your time is going to not be entirely accurate towards what the player is going to spend on something, because the player has not seen the level yet. But as we saw from that took us about a minute to get up here. Of course, I was going kind of slow. I could probably do it way faster, but you don't want to try and speedrun a level starting out or when you're playtesting. Starting out, you just kind of want to play your level and try and simulate the experience as if you were the player. It's hard to get it exact, but, you know, do your best to guess what a player would play like. Sometimes your estimates can be incredibly off, in which case you will need to adjust it. But that's the other important part. Make sure other people playtest your levels, because that's also very important. If you check the Hat and Time Discord, there you can find probably a bunch of people to playtest your levels. You might even get me to playtest your level if you want. Going into the channel #moddinggeneral will generally give you a place where you can say, hey, I'm looking for some playtesters. Is anybody available? And usually you'll get some people that will be interested in playing your level. We're a pretty nice community. As you know, the timepiece is also an actor, so say we wanted to end the level, we would go over here, go for time_object, time object. There we go. And you want the one that's hat_hat object. Cluster is the one at the end of the one at the end of the Mustache Girl fight. Metro is the one with all of the fancy Metro effects. Same with Alps. Time Rift is what we want because this will give us the sort of proper stuff for a Time Rift, and it'll also open a roulette at the end. Unless you don't want a roulette, then just use the default time object. That also works. But I recommend the Time Rift one because it just sort of feels nice. So then you just choose that, place it down, you'll get a little error that you can ignore. Now we have our timepiece in the level, but we're not done with our level yet, so we're gonna now remove that. I'm just showing you how to place it down. Now one of the last most important actors is also the most tedious and most boring ones to put down. Pawns, or coins, like Mario. These are called energy bit. I hate that they're called that. If you place one down, you got a little collector thing. Now, you don't need to place pawns in your level, but placing pawns in your level will make it sort of feel complete. So say we want to put like 3 or so here, and then sort of put some up here, sort of placing them. Now, if you have noticed, hey, that looks really boring and really tedious. You're right. It is. There's not really much else I can say. This is really boring to do, and I usually save it for the end because I hate doing it. But I do remember Dawn was coming out with some sort of pawn placement tool. If you check the Hat in Time modding Discord, that might be available. But, you know, I don't know if that's ready yet, and I don't know if it's going to be ready at the time of whenever this video goes up. But in general, that's how you place down pawns. You just sort of drag them into place, and it's really boring, but, you know, it's just kind of something you gotta do. General good pawn placement should sort of lead the player along to where they should be going. It gives good guidance to the player, and it makes them feel nice. But you don't want to have too many, because having too many sort of feels obnoxious, I guess. So there's like an art to it that I still haven't mastered because I don't like placing pawns. And then lastly, playtesting level should give you a general idea of how many health pawns you want to put into your level, which you can get by getting health bit. It's pretty. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Now I'm just sort of gonna give a general idea. You don't have to place your pawns like this. This is just sort of how I do it. I sort of like making it like that. And then what I also do is I always make sure that there's some at the checkpoint. Because players don't like dying. So you want to place like... Make sure you place health in the level, because if you don't, it's going to feel sort of frustrating. Even if you don't lose a lot of progress, it can be sort of frustrating. Health pawns are incredibly important, especially if you're making a purple rift. So that basically covers actors. There's obviously way more, and there's a lot of complexities in sort of other actors that some of them are really complicated to set up, and I'm gonna do individual tutorials on those. For example, zip lines are pretty complicated to set up. Ladders are a nightmare. Oh god, ladders? Oh. For the more complicated actors, I will make individual one-off tutorials for those. After I finish this Blue Rift series, I'm gonna make a series of tutorials focused on very specific things. I'll also be taking requests for if people want to know how to do a very specific thing, then I will make a tutorial on it. Of course, those user request tutorials will come after I finish the Blue Rift series. Anyway, this is a Blue Rift, but let's say we want to put like an NPC or something into the level, or like, you know, something to talk to, just something to break up the sort of endless void. Well, as you might imagine, NPC is under here, and we want to make them talk to us. But here's the thing. In order to make them talk and say dialogue unique to you, you will need to make something called a conversation tree. In the next tutorial, I'll be going over how to make conversation trees and how to make your NPCs talk to you.